There is something bad going on, and we have got to get out of here. Do you understand me?
Yeah. Are we sick?
No, of course not.
How do you know?
They said it's just people in the city. We're good.
Didn't Jimmy work in the city?
That's right, he did. We're fine, trust me.
All right.
Them staying as chill as they can possibly stay with the child in the car is a great idea. Kids that have, I mean, she's not a little kid, but she's pretty damn young. She just watched her dad shoot her neighbor. Them staying calm is going to help a lot with her own emotional regulation in this moment. Sarah's ability to stay calm and say that she's fine, even though things are clearly not fine, I think is a direct result of the fact that Joel and Tommy are staying calm. They're being directive. They're telling her what to do. They're not asking a ton of questions. They're keeping careful with how many things they disclose to her. But overall, she's going to look to them to be the directors of how do I handle this situation. When adults have kids in the midst like this, it's very, very important to keep that in mind, that children are often looking to you to see how they should react to things that they don't understand. And there's no reason why we would ever expect Sarah to understand what's going on right now.
It's okay, baby. We're safe. We're safe. Hey, we need help.
Stop!
Please. It's my daughter. I think her leg is broken.
Stop right there!
Okay. We're not sick.
Got a couple of civilians in the outer perimeter. Please advise.
Daddy, what about Uncle Tommy?
We're gonna get you to safety and go back for him, okay?
Sir, there's a little girl. But... Yes, sir.
Somebody, we've just been through hell. Okay, we just need... Shit. Please don't.
Oh, no.
Sarah. Move your hands, baby. I know, baby, I know. God. Listen to me. I know this hurts, baby. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby. I know it hurts. Come on, baby. Please. I know, baby. I know. Sarah. Baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Come on. No. No. No, no, please.
Obviously, losing a child is one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing, that a parent can ever experience. Especially for, parents who basically shift either most of or the entirety of their identity into, I am now the caretaker for my children. I am the person that ensures their safety. When your child dies in a moment like this, there's a chance that, you basically are presented with an opportunity to make meaning out of that. And some parents will take that moment and will see it as a failure on their part. I failed to protect my child. And many times, if parents are still together when they lose a child, the relationship is now in big trouble. Now, Joel's on his own. He's got Tommy, but Joel losing his daughter there, we literally bear witness to a massive part of his identity being shattered there. All of a sudden, I have failed. And a lot of parents experience survivor's guilt, which is a theme that we're probably going to get into a little bit here. But like that scene is heavy as hell.
You use it to smuggle things?
Yep.
Like illegal things?
Sometimes.
You ever smuggle a kid before?
No, that's a first. What's the deal with you and Marlene anyways?
I don't know. She's my friend, I guess.
Your friend, huh? You're friends with the leader of the Fireflies. What are you, like 12?
She knew my mom, and she's been looking after me. And I'm 14, not that that has anything to do with anything.
So where are your parents?
Where are anyone's parents? They've been gone a long, long time.
So instead of just staying in school, you decide to run off and join the Fireflies, is that it?
Look, I'm not supposed to tell you why you're smuggling me, if that's what you're getting at.
You wanna know the best thing about my job? I don't gotta know why. To be honest with you, I give two shits what you're up to.
Well, great.
Good.
Two things. The first is we can tell that Joel potentially is already accessing some memory of his daughter by just happening to guess that Ellie is 12. So he's already seeing it. That's not a coincidence, in my opinion. He could pick any number. He goes with 12. So that tells me that at least somewhere in there, seeing this child that is roughly similar in size and physique to his daughter is drumming some of that up. And my guess is that in order to maintain the suppression of whatever that emotion is, in the spirit of survival, Joel is going to suppress that by being angry or cold toward Ellie. Which brings us to part 2, which is in that exchange right there. He's being a dick, right? He's like, I could give two shits what you're up to. You can see the harshness and the distance. And I'm guessing that that's more about Joel trying to distance himself from his own emotional experience than having anything to do with a sense of annoyance toward Ellie.
What are we doing here? This is not us.
What do you know about us? About me?
I know that you are smarter than this.
Really? Guess what? We're shitty people, Joel. It's been that way for a long time.
No, we are survivors.
This is our chance.
It is over, Tess! Now, we tried. Let's just go home.
I'm not going anywhere. This is my last stop.
What?
Our luck had to run out sooner or later.
You going on?
No, don't touch me.
Holy shit. She's infected.
Joel,
Let me see it.
I didn't mean for this.
Show it to me. Oh, Christ.
Oops, right? Give me your arm. This was 3 weeks. I was bitten an hour ago, and it's already worse. This is fucking real, Joel. You've got to get this girl to Tommy's. He used to run with this crew. He'll know where to go.
No. That was your crusade. I am not doing that.
Yes, you are. Look. There's enough here that you have to feel some sort of obligation to me, so you get her to Tommy's. They're here.
Damn it.
I can buy you some time, but you have to run.
You want us to just leave you here?
Yes.
There is no way that...
I will not turn into one of those things. Come on. Make this easy for me.
If Joel is the caretaker that I believe him to be, this represents yet another failure of caretaking. I didn't keep Tess safe. And you see a similar response here to Tess that we saw where he gets angry when she is harmed. And I really think that's less about being angry about her and more about being angry with himself that he couldn't take care of her. He couldn't keep her safe. He has now failed another person that he invited in to be close. And so now he is tasked, whether it's through obligation or just because this is what he's got to do, with taking care of another person, in this case, Ellie. And so I would expect that he's probably going to become even more calloused because he's literally just had another failure caregiving blow. Jesus, man.
Man, I had an art book filled with these. I always thought they were super cute. Not fairies, though. They creep me out.
All right, man.
These are little vulnerable moments, man. This is the kind of stuff when you have these little playful moments that facilitate connection and camaraderie. And Joel seems hesitant to take that in, which I think makes sense. The more Joel engages in that kind of conversation with Ellie, the more connected he has the risk in his mind of being to her. And the more connected he is to her, the more his desire to take care of her grows. The more his desire to take care of her, the more a very vulnerable aspect of his sense of self comes out. Potentially some of that, I've failed at this before, and we're going to see some of his coping mechanisms as it relates to that, theoretically, as that happens. So we would expect to see Joel still be pretty hesitant in this. The thing is, Ellie doesn't have the contextual understanding of Joel being cold in these moments, and so Ellie very well may personalize these exchanges and think that maybe it's something that she's doing wrong because she's making a bid for connection and Joel is cold. And if he does that enough, she's going to start wondering what's wrong with me. Maybe she'll say what's wrong with this guy, which is the more adult version of it. But a child would say what's wrong with me, which is why as an adult, you got to be very careful when children try to engage with you in that way, especially if you're their caregiver and reliable.
Seriously, you got to take that kid back to where you found her.
I can't just take her back.
Then send her packing. Let her find her own way. Look, let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, I had somebody that I cared about. A partner. Somebody I had to look after. And in this world, that sort of shit's good for one thing. Getting you killed. So you know what I did? I wisened the fuck up. And I realized it's got to be just me.
Bill, it ain't like that. It's
bullshit. It is just like that. Hey! What'd I say to you when we walked down the steps? What'd I say?
I'm just fixing your stupid pile.
Don't touch. God damn it. You keep babysitting long enough and eventually it's gonna blow up in
Bill,
your face.
Can we please just get on with it?
Here. Let's get on with it.
There's a lot to unpack there. I think in some ways we're seeing Bill say something explicitly that Joel has passively indicated, which is that being connected to people is a liability in the sense that there's a good chance you're going to lose them. And taking care of somebody, being emotionally invested in somebody, means that eventually you're going to be let down. And the pain of that is so unbearable that you might as well take control of it and separate yourself and be the one who at least can say, I was the one who decided that I was alone, instead of the circumstances dictating that I be alone through the person who I care about dying. And you'll notice that Joel doesn't really disagree with him there, because that's happened to him on multiple occasions, the most recent one being with Tess. So Joel's reticence there, I think, is a reflection of understanding that what Bill is saying is true, to an extent. But at the same time, that rubs directly against our human desire for connection and to take care of. And when it's a piece of your identity, which for many of us it is, we take care of the people around us. The idea that survival would be better in terms of its odds if we don't engage with that basic need is more cognitive dissonance. And we're going to see people take control and try to mitigate that dissonance in different ways. And it sounds like what Bill did was say, you know what? Fine. I'm doing this on my own. I'm making the hard decision now because it's better for me in the long run. Jesus!
I shot the hell out of that guy, huh?
Yeah, you sure did.
I feel sick.
And you just hang back like I told you to.
Well, you're glad I didn't, right?
I'm glad I didn't get my head blown off by a goddamn kid.
You know what? No. How about, hey, Ellie, I know it wasn't easy, but it was either him or me. Thanks for saving my ass. You got anything like that for me, Joel?
We gotta get going.
Lead the way.
I'm not justifying Joel at all here, but I can understand it. Again, Joel acknowledging that he needs help? No. Ellie needing to kill that guy to Joel represents another failure on his part. He couldn't keep himself safe enough to be able to get to her and protect her. The fact that she would need to take care of him, oftentimes caregivers will see that as a failure in caregiving, and it's not. He needs to realize that Ellie is not helpless, and she can be protected, and she can protect herself. Something his daughter wasn't able to do. And I think in some ways, seeing a child Ellie's age capable of holding her own, fighting these off, protecting him is intolerable to him because his daughter couldn't do that. And now here he is being protected by her. She demands thanks. He's going to put distance there. You know, her saving him shows that she has some level of respect and care for him. And I think if he acknowledges that, again, it's too painful. The common theme with Joel is that vulnerability is too painful. Now, that said, good on Ellie for demanding more from him. Standing up to Joel, that's not something many people do. People who stand up to Joel get hurt. And so the person that is entrusted with being taken care of by Joel standing up to him, I think is huge for Ellie in terms of her standing her ground with how important she is as a person and that she's capable. And I think it's also important from a sense that like it shows a level of like mutual need for each other. Ellie constantly makes bids for connection with Joel. Joel finds that intolerable. Joel pushes Ellie away. Ellie gets frustrated, but Ellie persists because Ellie has been taken care of her whole life by others, hasn't had to learn to be on her own like Joel has.
How many bullets do you have left?
They're gonna kill us.
What other choice do we have?
We jump.
No, it's too high and you can't swim. I'll boost you up, you run past them.
You keep me afloat.
Ellie!
No time to argue.
Ellie! God damn it! Ah!
Henry! He's awake!
Hey, you. We're alive. Okay.
See? What'd I tell you, huh? He's good. Everything's fine. You know, Sam's the one who spotted you. You guys are taking quite a bit of water. What's wrong?
Henry!
Get back, son!
Hey. He's pissed, but he's not gonna do anything.
You sure about that?
Stop!
Joel?
He left us to die out there.
No, you had a good chance of making it, and you did. But coming back for you meant putting him at risk. Stay back. If it was the other way around, would you have come back for us? I saved you.
He saved me too. We would have drowned.
There was a very interesting moment that happened there. Joel is locked on Henry, holding his gun on him, ready to hurt him. And when he says, I saved you, Joel doesn't really care. When Ellie says, he saved me too, you see him pull back and turn and look. That grabs him. And so my hypothesis there is that Joel's not mad that he was left to die. He's mad that Ellie was left to die. And is probably not going to bring himself to be angry at Ellie for jumping down, but is instead mad at himself for basically putting Ellie at risk by trusting Sam and Henry. Like, we're seeing Joel's attentiveness to things pop up when Ellie is involved. He doesn't seem to have much care about himself. He's downloaded all of that survival into Ellie. And that little nonverbal that happens there, and the way that he looks at Ellie and pulls back when she says that Ellie was saved, shows that that's really what he cares about. Water rules. Don't leave water running. Only take what you plan on using. Don't leave a mess. I'd like to use this as an opportunity to say that these rules suck, and here's the reason why they suck. Because they're all about what you shouldn't do. If you want to write rules that children and adults can follow a lot more clearly, tell them what to do, not what not to do. When you say don't do something, you open up the entire smorgasbord of other things that are possible, and you leave that person to try to select what that is. If you tell them specifically what to do, you give a directive, that person knows exactly what to do. For example here, don't leave the water running. Instead, you might say, only run water when needed. Instead of don't leave a mess, you might say, keep the area clean. You might roll your eyes at that and go, oh my God, dude, could you chill? But seriously, especially with children, tell them what to do, not what not to do. Makes a huge difference from a leadership standpoint.
Oh, shit. Come here, keep your head down. All right, now, I'm gonna jump down there and I'm gonna clear us a path.
What about me?
You stay here.
This is so stupid. We'd have more of a fucking chance if you let me help.
I am. You seem to know your way around a gun. You reckon you can handle that?
Well, I sort of shot a rifle before, but it was at rats
Rats?
with BBs.
Well, it's the same basic concept. Lift it up. All right, now, you're gonna want to lean right into that stock, as it is gonna kick a hell of a lot more than any BB rifle.
Okay.
Go and pull the bolt back. Grab it right there. Just tug it. There you go. And as soon as you fire, you're gonna want to get another round in there quick. Listen to me. If I get into trouble down there, you make every shot count. Yeah?
I got this.
All right. And just so we're clear about back there, it was either him or me.
There's two hugely vulnerable aspects of that interaction that Joel and Ellie had. First one is that teaching somebody a skill like that on a one-to-one setting, intimate. It's a very, like, fatherly role to take on, and undoubtedly difficult for Joel to do. Second, he's trusting Ellie with his life. He's trusting her to take care of it, which, again, is pretty remarkable. I think there's some level of access after really reflecting on what happened there, after Joel gets through the intensity of it, his endocrine system flushes out a little bit, prefrontal cortex a little more online. He goes, you know what? Holy shit, she can do this. I'm gonna do what I can, and I'm gonna trust her here, and I'm gonna build that relationship with her, and I'm gonna teach her how to do it. And you see him get a bit gentle there, and I cannot understate how hard that is for Joel. I'm not trying to give him a gold star for doing the basics, but given what he's been through and what he's learned he needs to do to survive, he deserves some level of credit here. And for that reason, even though he doesn't explicitly say thank you, Ellie knows that what he said was thank you. And that's, I think, in some ways good enough. I think asking Joel to go through all of that and then say thank you is asking him to open up way too quickly. We're still seeing him go through the shift of Ellie as cargo to Ellie as person. So she's proving herself to Joel. He's building a little bit of trust. He's starting to see her as a person. He's going through a whole lot of dissonant thoughts right now. So good on him for taking that and leveraging it into a relationship building moment, and in some ways a survival moment.
If you can get it open, I can crawl through and clear that door. Oh, yeesh. That is a big rat.
Bit more trust. Joel's not saying things like, be careful, do this, do that.
And voila.
I think in a lot of ways, figuring out what's going on for Joel is more about what he doesn't say versus what he does say. Joel interjects himself when there's some anxiety about whether she's going to be in trouble, or when he needs to be like directive about something, or when he's not sure whether she can survive a certain thing. Joel is quiet when there's trust. So I think Joel not saying anything there is indicative of that. One of the things that we're always reading when we're looking at human interactions is not just verbal dialogue, but nonverbal, and also the absence. When do people not say things? When do they stay silent? When do they just allow things to play out in the way that they do? Sometimes we get a pretty significant window into anxiety and insecurity through over-vocalization.
Where's Sam?
I'll let him sleep in for once.
Oh.
Well, if you want him to join us, you can go wake his ass up.
Okay. Sam? Sam!
The hell?
Shit, he's turning!
That's my fucking brother! Screw it!
Shit!
Marlene? Ellie, are you all right?
Oh my god.
Sam?
Oh no.
Sam?
Henry? Ellie, stay there. Henry?
What have you done?
I'm gonna get that gun from you, okay?
Whoa, okay, easy.
It's your fault.
This is nobody's fault, Henry.
It's all your fault.
Henry! Henry, no!
Oh my God.
And obviously, Henry seeing what happened, he knows, right? Like he's been conditioned. He knows what's at stake. He knows that as soon as Sam turned, there's no bringing him back. He shoos Joel off because he wants to take care of it himself. And I think Henry, in that moment, whether he consciously knew it or not, sees that moment as the final chance for him to take care of Sam by killing him. He sees his brother turn, which is quite literally his worst nightmare. I actually think it would have been easier if Sam was like shot and killed by one of the hunters than him turning, because Henry has been busting his ass to take care of Sam, and in his mind failed him. And so the only thing he has left to do is kill him and put him out of his misery as the last act of caregiving. And then we see Henry deeply blame himself. We see him go through the exact same thing we saw Joel go through at the beginning of the game with his daughter. His role of caretaker was shattered. The thing that he was living for is gone. And Henry has probably paid so much attention to Sam and his well-being that he's forgotten what aspects of him are worth taking care of. And in that moment decides to end his life because he no longer has anything to live for. He would rather die than live with a sense of failure that he failed the one person he promised he would take care of. And in some ways, as weird as it sounds, it's understandable why he would do that. But ultimately, I think Henry died when Sam died. Henry killed himself when he killed Sam.
What have you done?
I'm gonna get that gun from you, okay? Whoa, okay, easy.
It's your fault.
This is nobody's fault, Henry.
It's all your fault.
Henry! Henry, no!
Oh my God.
I want to let everybody know that if you're ever experiencing suicidal ideation, there is help out there. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available 24 hours a day. I volunteered on the National Suicide Prevention Hotline for 3 years. I used to do overnight shifts. If you call the number, there's somebody on the other end who's there to listen. They're not there to report you to the police. They're not there to shame you for what you're experiencing. They're there to listen. They're there to help. They're there to talk with you. Suicide often happens when people feel hopeless and like there's no other option. It's rarely impulsive. In this case, could we argue that maybe Henry's suicide is impulsive? Maybe. But also, it could have been something where he's kind of known if something happened to Sam, that would be it. I do have a video about suicide on YouTube as well. We have a nice 40-minute conversation about suicide, but suicide affects a lot of people. It's intense to experience suicidal ideation. You're not alone if you experience suicidal ideation. You don't have to be actively suicidal to experience suicidal ideation. In fact, thoughts about ending our own lives are common. So some people get distressed by it. They think something's wrong with them if they have those thoughts in their mind. They're just thoughts. Thoughts do not become actions until they become actions. Henry's talking to himself when he says it's your fault. You hear him talk to himself in the third person. So that's the other point I want to make here, which is in that scene, you see him says, what have you done, Henry? Henry, it's all your fault. And even though he's pointing the gun at Joel, he is talking to himself. It's sort of a mini act of self-objectification, which I also think makes it easier for him to pull the trigger, in the sense that he can't fathom the idea that he would let Sam down. And it so deeply pierces his core sense of self that he literally separates that. It's all your fault. He speaks in the third person to himself. I think in that moment when he shoots himself, he's shooting that part of himself that he perceives as having let Sam down. Almost in some way of getting revenge on himself for the fact that he let Sam down. I had a supervisor once who used to always say that suicide is more about the intent to kill than it is about the intent to end one's own life. It could very well be that Henry wants to kill either the circumstances there, wants to kill the moment, wants to kill whatever it is that got Sam, but he can't do that, so he ends his own life. He could have shot Joel, he could have shot Ellie, but it wouldn't have accomplished anything because he would have lived with still all of the narrative that he was going to have about the fact that Sam died. And ultimately, it's not Henry's fault. It's the circumstance. He did what he could.
Maria.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're in the control room. Steve's about to start it back up. You want to come check it out?
I'd rather eat with Ellie.
It's my turn anyway. I'll go.
I'll come with you. Go with Maria. Get some food in.
Come on, Ellie. Let's give the boys some space.
Very, very significant moment there. Happens very quick. Joel says, let's split up, which for all we know, they ain't done in a long time. And we see Ellie's anxiety spike immediately. I think this is because Joel misjudges the level of attachment that Ellie has to him and makes the false assumption that because Tommy is Joel's brother and because Joel trusts him and his wife, that Ellie will too. But Ellie knows nothing about these people. And all she knows from anything Joel has ever told her is that they ended on bad terms. Ellie's attachment in novelty and in distress is to Joel. And they're in a new place. And Joel has put distance between the two of them, probably thinking it's no big deal. But if Ellie is a person that he's trying to take care of, he has to be mindful of that. Not that he necessarily can't split up with her, but he absolutely needs to say to her something along the lines of, hey, what do you need? Are you okay? Is there information you need? Do you want to come with me? What is it that you need from me? Because Joel is the pillar here. He thinks that Maria is safe. And she probably is. But why? How do we know that? We just met her. And so did Ellie. And Ellie's never had a stable caregiver besides Joel. So Joel handing her off there is sort of like a strange situation for her. One of the ways in childhood attachment that you can tell that a child is securely attached is when they are removed from the presence of their caregiver physically, they become distressed. They eventually regulate because they have sort of an internal image of their parent as being reliable, but their initial reaction to separation from the parent is distress. To this point, we have not seen that kind of stress from Ellie when they've been split apart. Ellie tends to take, up until this point, the perspective of, I got this. I'm good. I don't need you. I can hold my own. I'm a big girl. We see her become a lot more childlike there when presented with, okay, we're going to go our separate ways. Her anxiety spikes and she gets nervous and she becomes distressed. Possibly indicative of secure attachment forming to Joel as her caretaker.
Why bring her here?
I was supposed to deliver to the Fireflies. The way I figure they're your boys. You finish the job, you collect the whole damn payment.
I haven't seen a Firefly in years.
You know where they are. Now, I'm not asking for much, Tommy. I just want some simple gear, enough to set me on my way.
What makes you think I'd do this for you?
This isn't for me, Tommy. This is for your damn cause.
My cause is my family now. You ain't talking about some walk in the park here.
Jesus, boy. Have Maria get some of your born-again friends to do it.
They got families, too.
Tommy, I need this.
You want some gear? Sure. But I ain't taking that girl off your hands.
This is how you gonna repay me, huh?
Repay you?
For all those goddamn years I took care of us.
Took care? That's what you call it? I got nothing but nightmares from those years.
You survived because of me.
It wasn't worth it.
I bring you the cure from mankind, and you wanna play the pissy little brother.
We ain't back in Boston. You lay your hands on me again, it won't end well for you.
I take care of you because taking care of people is my identity, because I'm anxious when people aren't taken care of. And then when the time is right, I hold it over your head. I'm sure many people here have probably experienced a resentful martyr, perhaps in their family, perhaps a friend, the person who does everything for you and then expects something in return even though you haven't asked them to do the thing that they're doing. And it really is more about Joel here than it is about Tommy. Joel says, you survived because of me. And Tommy says, I wasn't worth it. And you see in that moment, Joel lose his shit because Joel very much rallies his entire sense of self around survival and caretaking. And to hear that his caretaking isn't appreciated means he isn't appreciated. And he gets aggressive. If you're a person who gets anxious when the people around you aren't taken care of and you go into overdrive to take care of them when they do not ask for it, you do not get to resent folks for that. That is a decision that you make. And in this case, that is a decision that Joel made to take care of Tommy. Tommy's a grown-ass man. So trying to pull that favor is a bit unfair. I tend to side a little bit with Tommy. I don't know you shit. You made that decision to do that. And I don't even know that I'm grateful for it, because look at the shit I gotta live in.
Do you even realize what your life means? Huh? Running off like that, putting yourself at risk? It's pretty goddamn stupid.
Well, I guess we're both disappointed with each other then.
What do you want from me?
Admit that you wanted to get rid of me the whole time.
Tommy knows this area
Oh,
better
fuck
than...
that.
Well, I'm sorry. I trust him better than I trust myself.
Stop with the bullshit. What are you so afraid of? That I'm gonna end up like Sam? I can't get infected. I can take care of myself.
How many close calls have we had?
Well, we seem to be doing all right so far.
And now you'll be doing even better with Tommy.
I'm not her, you know.
What?
Maria told me about Sarah.
Ellie?
And
You are treading on some mighty thin ice here.
I'm sorry about your daughter, Joel. But I have lost people too.
You have no idea what loss is.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
You're right. You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad.
It's too hard for Joel to go there. You see all of Joel's sense of failure and survivor's guilt come out in that scene. Truth of the matter is, Ellie's right. He probably does see her as his daughter, which is why he's so desperately afraid of failing her. To the point that he's twisted himself into cognitive knots thinking, you're safer with Tommy. He's trying to act like passing her off to Tommy is a form of caregiving. And it's not because he thinks Tommy's going to do a better job. It's because he's failed before. It's because he sees his daughter in Ellie. It's because he held his daughter in his arms when she died. And for so many parents, if you're in a moment like that, you perceive that as a failure. And the idea that Joel would go through that not once, but possibly twice is unbearable to him. If he hands her off to Tommy, he can tell himself that she was better off for it. And if something happens to her, he can blame Tommy instead of himself. He preserves his sense of self by trying to hand her off to Tommy. When he says to Ellie, you don't know what loss is, we might look at that and say, wow, what a dick move. Any ounce of empathy he could have for her is going to connect him to her in that moment. Everything he's doing is a desperate attempt to override the sense of connection he feels to her. And when she has the cojones to say to him what she says to him and facilitate more of that connection, it scrambles him. The best part of this game is the tension between the connection we experience and witness between the characters and the fact that that connection is the antithesis to them surviving. People do this all the time. It's sort of cliche, but it's also, there's some truth to it. This is why, to some extent, burying your emotional experience instead of attending to it and allowing space for it as things happen creates problems later on. This has nothing to do with Ellie. This has everything to do with Joel's sense of self. All Ellie wants is somebody to take care of her. Joel is the guy that can do it, but Joel is up in his head about it for good reason. He hasn't had anybody to process it with. He probably hasn't trusted anybody to process it with. At the same time, I think there's a little piece of trust there, a little piece, a little connection between Joel and Ellie. When Joel says, you're right, you're not my daughter and I'm not your dad, that's an acknowledgement of Sarah. And really, up until this point, we have never seen Joel acknowledge Sarah, even to Tommy. He just says, I'm good. He doesn't even acknowledge. He looks at the picture, but he doesn't acknowledge Sarah. That's the first time we've seen him acknowledge Sarah when he's talking to Ellie. There's something there, and he is ultimate dissonance going on for Joel, and he's doing everything he can to mitigate that aversive arousal. We all do it.
It's the only way I'm going to be able to convince the others.
Convince them of what?
That you can come around. You have heart. You're loyal. And you're special.
Oh.
stupid little girl. You are making it very difficult to keep you alive. What am I supposed to tell the others now?
Ellie.
What?
Tell them that Ellie is the little girl that broke your fucking finger.
How did you put it? Huh? Tiny pieces.
David is using a pretty significant tactic in having Ellie around, which is very unsettling, which is that he's basically doing a me versus them with her in the hopes that him looking like some form of sympathetic figure to her, that it's in her best interest to align with and understand that, like, that's gonna basically push her to let her guard down and give him information that he wants. And we don't know what information he wants. And it's a tactic that's going to work really good with a kid. It wouldn't work with Joel. There's no way he would do that with Joel. But with Ellie, he is seeing her as a 14-year-old. He's seeing her without context, other than the fact that she's killed a bunch of dudes. But it's a pretty strong tactic, and it works to an extent because Ellie has given him her name. She continues to give him information. She eats the food he gives her. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on here that we would look at and go, dude, Ellie, don't do that. But she also doesn't have her caregiver and secure base and Joel around with her during these decisions, which goes to show that developmentally, Ellie is not as advanced as she says that she is. She plays the act as if she's very self-sufficient and can survive this world. But that's all an act of putting emotional distance between her and people. We're seeing that in reality, Ellie's not actually capable of surviving this kind of stuff because she just doesn't have the experience. Why would we ever expect her to? She needs Joel around to take care of her. It's why their relationship is so symbiotic. No.
I knew you had heart. You know, it's okay to give up. Ain't no shame in it. I guess not. Just not your style, is it? You can try begging.
Fuck you.
You think you know me? Huh? Well, let me tell you something. You have no idea what I'm capable of.
Stop! Fucking touch me!
It's okay. It's me. It's me. It's me. Look. It's me.
He tried to...
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
No.
It's okay.
That moment of Joel finding Ellie and stopping her from continuing to do that, but also in effect saving her, I think is probably the most significant moment that he and her have had up until this point, especially for Joel. There is no doubt in my mind that leading up until that moment, as Joel's running through the snowy streets, the only thing he has in his mind is the now probably merged, internalized version of Ellie and his daughter. The two of them symbolizing everything he cares about himself as a caregiver for the two of them. And in that moment, that desperation is so much about trying to make sure that he doesn't fail her because he's failed before. And in that moment, when he grabs her and is able to pull her away from that and hold her and say, baby girl, it is as close to a reparative experience that Joel is ever going to have, because he will never be able to hold his daughter alive and soothe her and call her baby girl and engage the depth of that caretaking responsibility. But with Ellie, he can. He quite literally has rebuilt a piece of his self, and being able to save her from that moment and actually say to her, it's going to be okay, and her be alive to hear it.
Feel that breeze, huh? I tell you, on a day like this, I just sit on my porch, pick away at my six string. Yeah, once we're done with this whole thing, I'm gonna teach you how to play guitar. Yeah, I reckon you'd really like that. What do you say, huh? Ellie, I'm talking to you.
Huh? Oh, yeah, sure, that sounds great.
Joel is very forward thinking. Joel is now envisioning a future with Ellie. Joel's all in. I'm gonna teach you how to play guitar. When this is all over, we're gonna do this. He's excited. He's initiating contact with her. Now she's responding in the way that he used to. Joel is seeing her emotional distress in reaction to whatever is that's going on is something that he needs to make better as her caregiver. So he's trying to use his own joys as a way to prop that up. Maybe thinking that if he shares with her stuff that makes him happy, maybe that'll bring her into a better mood. And then Joel gets the satisfaction of knowing that Ellie's doing okay because he's around and because he helped her get there. A lot of times for caregivers, when they see people in emotional distress, even if it's for very good reason, they jump into fix-it mode because they've wrapped too much of their own identity into the well-being of others. And this is why I constantly say to people, if you're a caregiver, you need to be careful. Because if you wrap your well-being into the well-being of others, you live and die by their well-being, and you potentially become annoying to them if they have reason to be upset. And I see Joel's engagement with Ellie as being a form of this. And he's going to see any shutdown, any push away from her as a failure on his part to make it better. And he's probably going to overcompensate because he can't sit with the anxiety of the fact that she's not doing okay right now.
Here. Maria showed this to me and I stole it. I hope you don't mind.
Oh boy. Look at Ellie, always taking care of folks. She grabbed Sam's toy, gave it to him. Now she took this and she's giving it to me. This is huge for her to give him this. This is her taking care of him. And let's see, do I accept it?
Well, no matter how hard you try, I guess you can't escape your past. Thank you.
Yeah, man. It's okay for people to take care of you. Your past is all right. Sarah dying wasn't your fault, man. You've shown through your care for Ellie to this point that you are capable of keeping a person safe. And reflecting on your previous experiences is important. You can keep Sarah alive through memory. I mean, one of the things he does by repressing that is basically keeps his daughter's image away. There's nobody around other than Tommy at this point who remembers Sarah. So grieving her and remembering her and having these little mementos in some ways for Joel, I think allows Sarah to live on. And I think now that he's seen Ellie maybe fill out some of the aspirations he had for himself as a father and has her around, it's easier and more palatable to take that in and handle that. And super reparative to have Ellie hand him that and for him to acknowledge that. That's great. But all of this is starting to facilitate a really significant amount of vulnerability from Joel. And I don't know about you, but I can feel kind of a sense of tension in that. Because up until this point, we have been conditioned to perceive connection as potentially problematic and unsafe.
We don't have to do this. You know that, right?
What's the other option?
Go back to Tommy's. Just be done with this whole damn thing.
After all we've been through. Everything that I've done. It can't be for nothing.
we get our first glimpse into Ellie's convictions and sense of self. Like, up until this point, Ellie hasn't really talked about what drives her. Like, she's passively indicated that being the cure matters in some form. Ellie, up until this point, has basically said to herself, I'm cargo because that's what I've been treated as since we left Boston. And that's what it was for Joel as well. As Joel has started seeing her as more of a person and has started engaging with her that way and taking care of her, it's shown Ellie that she's a person. She's more than just cargo in the purpose that she originally was intended for. And that lets her have some level of access to not self-actualization, but like, what's my purpose? Why do I do what I do? What matters to me? And she's gone through a lot of stuff and has a significant amount of cost sunk into this in the same way that Joel does. Well, Joel indicates, hey, you know, you matter to me a lot, and we could just kind of go back and get out of here, and you and I can have the relationship that we have. I'm finally in a position where I can take care of somebody who's safe, and maybe we don't do this. And what's wild about Joel saying that is, if you put that in context, Joel's basically saying, hey, man, that sense of self that I have achieved now successfully, that's overridden the failure that I have, is more important to me than saving humanity. And Ellie in some ways becomes the grown-up there and is like, no, man, we did this for a reason. And I've basically wrapped up my sense of self in the idea that, like, I can help other people in a huge way, and I'm gonna do that. And now Joel's at odds with that. That's a huge flip. That's a huge flip.
Once they remove it, they'll be able to reverse engineer a vaccine. A vaccine.
But it grows all over the brain.
It does.
Find someone else.
There is no one else.
Listen, you were gonna show me where...
Stop. I get it. But whatever it is you think you're going through right now is nothing to what I have been through. I knew her since she was born. I promised your mother I would look after her.
Then why are you letting this happen?
Because this isn't about me, or even her. There is no other choice here.
Yeah, you keep telling yourself that bullshit.
March him out of here. He tries anything, shoot him. Don't waste this gift, Joel.
Joel and Marlene in the same room is a beautiful thing from a philosophical standpoint. Marlene represents, I think, some form of utilitarianism. Like, she comes off as very cold in this, but Marlene is basically saying, you know what? Ellie's life is worth saving humanity, and I'm willing to make that sacrifice if we need to, as hard as it may be. Joel is on the complete other end of the spectrum of, no. My personal psychological needs are more important than whatever the larger global implications are. And Joel might have done the same thing early on in the game when he didn't have an emotional connection to Ellie, but Ellie now represents legitimate, not just psychological repair, but self-repair. Like, Joel has literally rebuilt himself in relation to her. Ellie fulfills a very deep psychological need for Joel. One that he has now gone completely backwards on what he was originally intending to do with this, to the point that he's now willing to kill to go try to figure this out and stop this. The tension between those ideas in that scene is awesome, because you could go either way, right? Like, you could say, yeah, I mean, we're invested in Ellie, but if this is a cure for humanity, do we look at the needs of the many over the needs of the one? Or is my psychological drive and need for connection and closeness and reliability and caregiving more important than that? And I don't think any of us know what we do unless we're in that position.
What happened?
We found the Fireflies. Turns out there's a whole lot more like you, Ellie. People that are immune. There's dozens, actually. Ain't done them a damn bit of good, neither. They've stopped looking for a cure. I'm taking us home. I'm sorry.
Wait! Let me go. Please.
You just come after her.
All right, we don't know what Ellie would have wanted, but Ellie indicated all the way up that she was down for this. She knew what she was in for. We don't know necessarily whether she knew she was going to die. I think she indicates that in the back of the car. We're now up against the same conundrum we were up against earlier, which is your own individual psychological need and desire for connection, reliability, and stability more important than anything else? Because both of them, in their own ways, have had their psychological needs met by each other. Joel gets to be a caregiver. Joel gets to matter. Joel gets to teach and show love and guide. Ellie gets somebody who loves her and shows her that she matters and that he will be there through thick and thin. And as we know, will literally go against the good of humanity for her. So both of them have had their individual needs met at the expense of what? How many people have died along the way with this? And is that okay? Are we okay with that? And the difficulty here is that now we're in a position where two people have to justify their survival. Am I surviving now at this point because of the connection I have to this other person? Why do we get to live instead of all these other people? What are we living for at this point? Ellie's entire existence of what she's been living for up until this point just got shattered. So we've come full circle. In the beginning of the game, we see Joel's entire existence shattered, his sense of self completely broken down. And now here we are with Ellie's entire sense of self completely broken down. While Joel has purpose. Joel feels useful. Joel knows what matters to him. And Ellie is a shell of herself because everything she's known about herself and her utility to the world has been completely destroyed. So what's your personal opinion on the matter? I understand psychologically why Joel did what he did. Our ego, our sense of self is a very powerful thing. Joel has been through so much shit. He needs everything he went through to matter. For Joel, a cure to humanity isn't what matters to him anymore. He put in all this effort, all this time, trying to redeem something that killed his daughter long ago. He found somebody to take that role. He can be a caregiver now. Everything here was worth it insofar as he has a repaired relationship with Ellie. So I understand why personally he did this. And at the same time, if we know that Ellie's the cure, there's a part of me that kind of wishes that Joel would have been overpowered. As tragic as that would be. We don't know for sure, but this is the best chance we had. And Ellie, you know, I think we have to give her some credit, right? Like, Ellie is more mature than we would expect a 14-year-old. I think the expectation that we would ask Ellie what she thinks is fine, but I think that's easy for us in our cushy little positions to say that. Again, I gotta remind everybody that, like, we have to put our mindset into this world. We have to live in this context that the game has created for us. We can't use our current sensibilities to this. If you have the cure for humanity in front of you, does the opinion of the 14-year-old you're going to operate on matter as much? If we knew that one child being immune to COVID and a surgery that could have been conducted on that child that would have killed that child would have cured COVID universally and gotten us back to normal, how would we feel about that? It's that one child. Now, granted, that doesn't take into account, like, you know, are people going to take the vaccine? But in this case, the world is in such shambles that, I mean, you're literally looking at husks of people. But so there's a lot of ambiguity here. And so at the end of the day, what humans do is they operate on what they know. We go with known quantities. And the known quantity that we have as players of the game and as Joel and as Ellie is that their connection's real and that they've met a need for each other. And that's the known quantity we have, which makes it in some ways easier for us to rationalize Joel and Ellie here and get on board with them. But I think if some of us had the opportunity where we were in the same kind of scenario that these folks are in, where you're literally eating canned beans, you're having to scavenge everything you possibly can, you're going through rooms of dead children and people who have died from this or been attacked from the things that are awful in this, all of a sudden the potential that one person could save it, if it means the death of one child, given all the death that you've seen at the hands of this, maybe it becomes a little bit more palatable because there's an opportunity there for this to go away. The only thing that I recommend for folks is just to remember that our current sensibilities don't apply here. And yeah, I'm sure there's a part of Joel that doesn't trust that Ellie dying is going to be for any good. He doesn't know. He made his decision. And the thing is, I think Joel knows that he made a selfish decision. That moment in the elevator, when Joel sort of like looks down and he takes a sigh and he closes his eyes and he kind of has this like, oh my God, what did I do moment? Joel knows what he did. He knows that he put his own needs ahead of humanity. And Marlene calls him out on it. And whether he cares or not is inconsequential. He made his decision. He shot the doctor. It's done. My whole issue is they rushed to kill the child to potentially create a vaccine rather than taking time to at least try and find a non-fatal way. I agree, right? But this is how desperate folks are. People are desperate. They see person with cure and they freak out. This is what adults do. We like to think that we're rational, well-adjusted, logical, think everything through. We're not. This thing got rushed, potentially at Ellie's expense. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, which is why I love this game. So Joel's satisfied. Joel got what he wanted. Ellie didn't. So we got to see Ellie sort of rebuild her sense of self now.
I don't think I ever told you, but Sarah and I used to take hikes like this. I think the two of you would have been good friends. I think you really would have liked her. I know she'd have liked you.
I bet I would have.
There he is, more disclosure. Joel is feasting on self-actualization right now. All of a sudden, Sarah's real easy to talk about because he's got what he needs. He is back to business, and Ellie's not. And there's going to be some real dissonance here for Joel because he got what he wanted, but at what cost? He knows that his fulfillment is predicated on a lie to the person that he cares about. And there's a chance that could eat him alive. Also, if you're Ellie here, think for a second. She's a smart girl. She's been alive for the entirety of the pandemic that's happened here. Marlene's gone. You wake up in a hospital gown in the back of a car with Joel driving away. It's a very odd way to come out of anesthesia. So the evidence experientially points to something's off. Joel's not telling me everything here. I trust Joel. I want him to be right because him being right justifies my survival. You want to talk about some ultimate tension there? Joel perpetuating that lie justifies my survival because now it's fine that I lived because it wouldn't have mattered anyway. If Joel's lying to me, my existence, my life is potentially the antithesis to humans being cured.
What's up, Joel?
Just checking in. Folks are, talking about how impressed they are with you and how well you're helping out.
It's good.
Yeah. Tommy and I went out riding the other day, and he told me a joke, and I thought about you. It's oh shoot, I forgot it. Something about a clock. How do you?
Joel, it's pretty late, and I gotta get up in a few hours.
Yeah. I know. I'm gonna get out of your hair. Just I want to show you something. Just give me 1 second. She's yours.
No. No. I don't know the first thing about
I
this.
promised that I'd teach you how to play.
You did.
So what do you say, tomorrow night? First lesson?
Deal.
Okay.
It's definitely awkward. And here's my hypothesis for why it's awkward. Joel, the second he decided to kill those doctors and take Ellie out of that hospital, Joel went past the point of no return in terms of, this is as close to a replacement daughter I'm ever gonna have. It's the closest to dad Joel is ever gonna be to what he would have been when Sarah was around. But Ellie doesn't owe Joel that. Ellie doesn't have to see Joel as a father. And my guess is that in some ways Ellie does not see Joel as a father. That Ellie sees Joel as more of a companion. Certainly takes care of her, but there have been times where she's held her own. And that he's not dad. Joel needs her to be daughter in some ways because that's what he committed to when he pulled her out of that high school. And so his fatherly vibes there, though sweet and sentimental and lovely, maybe don't land on Ellie the way that we would hope that they would. I think all of us want that relationship between the two of them. But it's ultimately not that relationship. It's a mimic of it, but it's not that. And I think Ellie probably feels some sense that her being around is for Joel's edification, which is a very awkward position to be in, and one that a child as perceptive as Ellie is likely to be able to feel and put their thumb on. Hence, awkward interaction. So I understand the thought process of like, don't shoot that clicker because it'll alert other clickers, but you have no idea if that clicker already, like whether that clicker already knows you're there. And I'm not a fan of basing current decisions of survival off of possibilities in the future. The known quantity is that clicker is on top of you and is probably going to kill you. And you have to kill it. Killing it's the only way. If it attracts attention, you deal with it then, but you've got to deal with what you got there. Like the idea that you would just hesitate there and not shoot that clicker because maybe there's a chance that it'll walk away. No way. We made a bunch of noise. Absolutely not. You take that shot. You absolutely take that shot. Like when it comes to crisis intervention, you deal with what you have. And as other things happen as consequence of that, you deal with them as they come. It's all about response and reaction. It's not even about proactivity when you're dealing with a crisis. You deal with stuff as it comes at you. You deal with the known quantities. In that moment, the known quantity is we have been jumped by a clicker and that thing's gotta go.
Look, I don't know what's going on with you and Joel.
Maria.
Guy really cares about you. And I'm sure he didn't mean to.
We're fine.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Sorry to pry.
Just a very subtle little thing there that Maria did that I am generally not fond of and is important to keep in mind. When somebody does something that hurts another person, whether physically or emotionally, as we can infer happened between Joel and Ellie last night with whatever it was, he cares a lot about you is not a justifiable reason, or it doesn't make the effect that you have with your actions more okay. In fact, if you care enough about a person, you will listen to them when they tell you that something you did, no matter how well intentioned, had an adverse impact on them. This, when taken to the absolute extreme, which I don't think is what happened here necessarily, but like when taken to the extreme in real life, is what leads to cycles of abuse. I do these things because I care so deeply about you. You gotta be really careful of that. So I don't like Maria using that as an excuse to triangulate herself between Ellie and Joel with whatever it is that happened. And honestly, I give Ellie a lot of credit for detriangulating Maria by setting a boundary there. I don't care if he cares. That's fine if he cares, but like his actions have impact on me and consequences. And it's important to keep that in mind.
I doubt myself. Why? To cover a bite mark. Right here. I got jumped by an infected when I was 14. And turns out I'm immune, so it healed with a ring of fucked up teeth marks and cysts and...
Ow! Fuck you. What? Hey. I told you a real fucking story.
I did tell you a real fucking story.
I see any long-term hit from not being believed by sharing something like that with somebody you're close to. I think it's really easy to look at that moment between Ellie and Dina and say, man, that's really shitty that Dina didn't believe Ellie. But why would she? Dina has had no representation in her life of the fact that somebody could be bitten and be immune. Absolutely none. So Ellie saying that absolutely blows apart the expectation and schema that Dina would have for that. And Dina and Ellie have a very playful relationship. So Dina is far more likely to take that information and assimilate it into her experience of Ellie and her experience of the cordyceps infection, which would be to say, Ellie's obviously telling me a story. She's obviously lying to me. That's what assimilation looks like. And Ellie has got an uphill battle ahead of her here because not very many people know about her journey to Utah because basically everybody that was there is dead. So the idea that she would be immune, we cannot expect that to compute with really anybody in this world who wasn't explicitly in the space where they saw her exposed to spores and not get infected or saw the actual bite marks. So we know Ellie tells the truth, but Dina has absolutely no reason to believe that. And we're left to sit with the tension of that because we have an omniscient view of that. That is going to be purely conceptual and a joke until the time that Ellie takes her mask off and goes through spores like she did with Joel, where Joel looked at it and went, holy shit. So I think it's reasonable to expect that. And if you're Ellie, I think in some ways you have to expect that that's going to be the reaction. I don't think that it's worthwhile to get overly upset with Dina for not believing her. You probably would have to work that in and really have like an intimate moment where you'd be like, look, I'm not lying to you, for that to really sink in.
Please don't shoot. Joel, please get up.
If you're Ellie there, I think we saw a really cool representation of a trauma response. This is a trauma. We all just experienced this trauma along with Ellie. Her expectations of Joel and of life have been shattered here with the lost sense of safety and security. She's literally pinned down and gets hit in the face. And this is a violation of her expectations. And think about how horrible that is, given everything we've seen, that she's still capable of experiencing a trauma. And we see the sound go out, everything's muffled. She's hyper-focused on Joel. She is in some ways dissociating and in shock. And that's a trauma response. And what's happening in that moment is her brain is collecting every piece of information in that environment and is associating it with absolute danger, which then we would hypothesize that later on in Ellie's life, anything that even remotely sniffs of the circumstances surrounding that, down to what the weather is like, is going to be enough to elicit this response out of her. And if she experiences this level of dissociation, there's a good chance that all of this is going to come back for her. And Joel can no longer protect her from that. Joel is now intertwined within that, which means that Ellie's internal representation of Joel has been shattered, absolutely destroyed. We've just had basically everything from the first game blown up in our face in a very intense way. And we all just collectively experienced the same trauma as Ellie did. Now, the question becomes, what is Ellie going to do with this? I bet you there is some part of Ellie that's laying there wishing she'd have died too. Because now you want to talk about more survivor's guilt? Now Ellie is outliving Joel. Now Ellie is going to have to process that on top of everything else that goes on. She just saw a person she probably never conceptualized as dying in the same way we idealize parents. She just saw that person die. That blows apart everything you ever thought about as it relates to mortality. And she is now left to pick up the pieces of that, which is the most unfortunate part about trauma. So this tells me that probably the remainder of this game is going to be a lot of trauma processing. And I don't know what Ellie's going to do. We're going to find out together, but this is a really intense moment, friends. It's a really intense moment. If you find that you're distressed right now and you're like struggling to put this together, I think that's the point. I want to remind us, we have to put ourselves into this context. We have ruthlessly murdered tons of people up until this point. We have an emotional investment in Joel, but this is the world we live in. We don't live in a world where people have things like plot armor or special privilege or anything like that. Joel is just as susceptible to these kind of random occurrences as anybody else. And I think part of our devastation is the fact that we have to come to terms with that. We have to come to terms with the fact that this world that we are navigating doesn't owe us anything. It's not going to keep us safe. It's not 100% impermeable to this type of event. And I think a lot of us love the comfort of some level of ignorance of this. The idea that Joel couldn't die. The people that I love in real life can't die. Like that happens to other people, not me. This game's a very realistic representation of the fact that like life will hand you stuff with a cold, hard fist in a way that you don't deserve. And that's just how it is. And we don't like to accept the reality of that. That at any point this shit could go away. For something as dumb as helping the wrong person escape infected. This is the world we live in. So remember that context as we go through the rest of the game. Baker City. We saw a pack of wild horses today. They were skittish. Then Dina offered them some of the fruit we collected. They ended up following us for a bit. Wish I had a camera. I've never seen her smile so wide. For like half a day, I wasn't thinking of the WLF or Joel. Feeling guilty about that now. This is a common experience that folks have when they're going through the grief process. One of the most jarring days that a person can have in the process of grief is when they have either a day or a significant period of time where they notice that they did not think about the person, because people falsely equate thoughts of the person to being like to keeping that person around, and somehow they're forgetting about them if they don't. And a lot of people like Ellie here get distressed when they realize that there are things that can distract them from that. They think somehow it diminishes the power of that person, or that that person matters less, and that's not true. It's you continuing to live your life, because life does go on despite the fact that the person you love died. So I really encourage folks to look at that as part of the grief process and to be very careful about the meaning you make of that. Because if the meaning you make out of that moment is that somehow you're forgetting about that person or they're not important anymore, really all you're doing is setting yourself up to feel pretty crappy about yourself. And you might start forcing yourself to think of the person in the ways that you know how, and you don't need to do that. It's okay to have moments where you don't think about the person that you're grieving. It doesn't mean you've forgotten about them.
If it were you or me, Joel would be halfway to Seattle already.
No, he wouldn't.
He absolutely fucking would be.
Well, we don't even know for certain that they're from Seattle.
Washington Liberation Front. That's what you said was on those patches.
What if they stole those jackets?
That's...
What's the WLF move?
What are you doing? You know what? I'm leaving tomorrow. And if you want to come with me, great.
You have no idea what you're walking into. You don't know how large that group is, how armed.
I don't care.
Something that we would be hypothesizing from an attachment perspective. Joel has become Ellie's secure base in some form of another, right? Like, he is the reliable person that she can go to in times of distress. And that got built up to a point that he's an internalized object for her, in a sense that she can rely on that internal symbol in times when he's not even around to draw strength from, and to see as reliable, and then to see herself as having efficacy in various adverse situations. Joel has now died. Joel is now somebody that she can't bring herself proximal to physically in times of distress, and right now is probably the most distress she's ever experienced in her entire life. And the one person that she would consider to be reliable in this moment, Joel, is not available to her. So we would hypothesize from an attachment perspective that what she's very likely to do here is to go inward and rely on that internal symbol of Joel, and by extension herself, to meet her needs. That she's very likely not going to transfer that into somebody like Tommy or Maria or anything like that. She's going to hold on to her internal Joel. And she's going to try to keep that alive as best she can. And one of the things that revenge and the seeking of revenge sometimes does for people is it keeps that internal object alive for that person. So for as long as I'm chasing after the people that killed Joel, I'm keeping Joel alive in my brain, and I feel that emotional sense of stability because Joel is available to me abstractly. You want to use attachment to sort of make sense of how we might anticipate Ellie's going to go through this. That's it right there.
I want to stop at his house before we leave. I just have to pick something up. Okay.
Oh, nice job, Dina. Nice job just letting Ellie do her thing. Sometimes, friends, the best thing you can do
Looks like Tommy took one.
Now Maria's got the stables locked down.
Is just let folks process.
Fucking Tommy. We'll figure something else out on the way. A car or a horse or something.
Okay.
This makes getting to Seattle a lot harder.
Then it's gonna be harder.
You can still change your mind, you know?
I know.
Just don't want you to feel like you have to.
Ellie. You go. I go. End of story.
My respect meter for Dina has gone up immensely here. Way to go. Way to play this cool. You're physically proximal. You're not pushing intimacy. You're letting Ellie know that you're there. Mad respect, man. Because you gotta know, if she knows Ellie well, which apparently she does, based on the way she's responding here, is that Ellie is a hair trigger away from saying, fuck you, I want nothing to do with you. And Dina knows that. And so Dina's playing this real slow, real cool. She's showing reliability rather than saying she's reliable, which I think is really important. And this could be a very healing relationship for Ellie. That said, if it is a healing relationship for Ellie, that is going to make it all the more difficult for her to process the danger that they are potentially in by going to Seattle, which is why you see Ellie say, "You sure you want to do this? Oh, ye person I care about immensely and who is there for me in a way that I need. I don't know that I can handle you dying either, so let me project all of my worries about that onto you." And Dina just silently cuts through it and says, hey, I know, but I'm going with you. And I think Ellie appreciates that. It's a good assertion of autonomy for Dina, while also facilitating connection.
What?
Could be that you just weren't who they were looking for. So they let you go.
Yeah, well, they did beat the shit out of us. The one guy, Jordan, kicked my face in.
Yeah, but why do you think that they didn't finish the...
It doesn't matter. They fucked up.
They did.
Oh, what a interesting conversation. You're seeing the split happen right there. Dina suggesting that they didn't kill us would suggest that they're merciful, that they did what they were out to do, and that these people actually have some humanity in them and were willing to spare us. Ellie has to polarize against that if she's going to stay committed to this. Ellie can't entertain that thought. Ellie entertains that thought, it throws this whole thing off, creates more dissonance. She ain't interested in this. We see her fight against that, right? Doesn't matter. Well, arguably it might, but it makes them not tragic figures, but it makes them figures that are worthy of empathy. And empathy is 100% going to make it harder to kill them. If Ellie looks at a person with her knife in her hand and she sees this person as somebody who's potentially merciful, makes it a lot harder for her to dig the knife in. If she can objectify them and look at them as merciless wolves, right, or beasts, or people with absolutely no regard for human life, makes it way easier for her to kill them because they're objects, they're not people. Dina is very obviously struggling with this a little bit because she's feeling a sense of, I don't know if it's gratefulness for the fact that they were spared, but it's going to make it harder for her to do what they got to do. And Ellie is so deeply committed here and is just, I'm getting Joel, I'm getting Abby, and I don't care who else gets in my way, that she's having a hard time dealing with that, and so she splits against.
Come on, Joel. Isn't that incredible?
Why don't you tell me what you like about it?
I don't know. People in your time, they had it easy.
I guess relatively speaking, sure.
I mean, they didn't need to go to space, but they did it anyway. It's ballsy.
Ballsy. All right, kiddo.
Yo, that line from Joel is the best possible deflection he could ever give to Ellie. See, she's still a kid, and kids, when interested in a thing but not sure whether it's okay or cool or acceptable to like a thing, will look to their caregivers to see what their reactions are about the thing that they're interested in, and oftentimes are hoping that when they talk about it with their caregiver, that caregiver will be as excited about it as they are, which oftentimes is not the case. So Ellie turns and sort of says, like, you know, what do you think? Isn't this incredible? Joel is not, probably doesn't care. Instead of making it about him, he turns it back to her and makes it about her and says, you tell me what you like about it. Which tells her two big things. The biggest one being, I care about you. I care about why you like this stuff. That whether I like this stuff ultimately doesn't matter, because I'm invested in this, because you are invested in this, and I think that's cool. That is possibly the most meaningful thing that he could ever say to her. And the second thing that it provides is an opportunity for her to engage with why she is interested with it, not just why others or media has told her she should be interested in it. She gets to develop an original thought about that. So those two things happening simultaneously are huge, and it happens in just one little line. It's awesome. Freaking love it, man.
I do okay.
Are you fucking kidding me?
You're welcome, kiddo. V. Welcome to Earth.
Yeah.
Whew. That, Isn't that kind of what we were hoping for through the entire Last of Us 1? For them to have a moment like that, you know, a person meaningful to you who's gotten you through so much shit, being able to show that they know you like that. This is how, as a caregiver, you help create a meaningful internal object for the people you take care of. And Ellie knows that this was big for Joel to do. There's no way she doesn't know that. Say what you want about Joel. Whatever you think about him is fine. It doesn't change the fact that him doing this for Ellie is unbelievably meaningful. And all of us would be lucky to have somebody do something like this to show the depth to which they understand who we are. To make this meaningful experience for her in a world where this just wouldn't generally even be remotely possible. This is Disney World times 1,000,000 for her, and she'll never forget it. This is what she's drawing on right now in the theater as she sits there reflecting back on this. This is how strongly internalized Joel is, how meaningful he is to Ellie's lived experience. This moment and this feeling is what was ripped away from her when she watched him die. This.
You gotta be smart about this. You start wearing that mask, you know, and eventually you're gonna slip up in front of someone you shouldn't.
I've never slipped.
You ain't told nobody new, have you? Not Jesse or Dina or...
Of course not.
Okay, good.
I think if this was about taking care of Ellie more than himself, Joel would come clean. Joel would tell the truth. He would sit down with her and he would say, okay, I need to tell you something. It's probably going to hurt. You're probably not going to like it. And if you don't, I understand. I don't necessarily know how you're going to react, but here's the thing. I lied to you. Here's why I lied to you. Here's why I did it. And as a result of that, everybody here thinks that there's no cure. And so you and I may be in danger if they find out, particularly I might be in danger if they find out that I did this. And people just don't have the whole story. Everybody's so on edge from this pandemic that the idea that I would have screwed this over for everybody might piss them off. They may also understand they've gotten to know you, so they may be able to look at it and go, yeah, I probably would have done the same thing. We don't know. But he'd come clean and he'd say, so here's why you need to do this. Here's the real reason why I need you protecting yourself here. But he doesn't do that. He, to this point, is continuing to perpetuate his lie, which tells me that this is all about preservation of him. I mean, by extension, it's caretaking for Ellie because I think he believes only he is capable of taking care of her. He wants that to be the case for sure. This is all about self-preservation for him and trying to preserve this relationship and keep it as close as he can. But it's on threads now.
After you took me out of the Firefly hospital, You said there were dozens of people like me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they told me.
I've never met another immune person before. Have you?
I could be hiding it. You do.
Do you believe that?
Is now really the time for this?
We traveled across the entire country to bring me to the Fireflies. I had so many questions for them. Why did you pull me out of there while I was still unconscious?
Because I let them run their tests. And when I saw that they were useless, I got us out of there.
How do you know they were useless? Maybe if you just would have given them more time, they could have figured something out.
There was no cure. There's nothing that could help these people or anybody else. I know you wish things were different. I wish things were different. But they ain't.
He's dug in. Here's the problem. She's now getting old enough that she understands, or at the very least is kind of internalizing every death she comes across as being something that could have been avoided had she been able to save them with her immunity. Now, she doesn't know that she could have died, or that she would have died. She has no way of knowing that. She thinks that there was a chance she could have lived through that. Joel hasn't told her that. So it would make sense that every death she sees, she looks at as being a total bummer, but she doesn't have any answers about why she couldn't help these people. And her empathy for them is deep. And so in this time of distress for her, in terms of what it means for her identity, she looks to Joel for comfort, and Joel is lying through his teeth, and she knows it. She knows he's not letting on. He had a good save there, but she knows that he's not totally leading on. And so how unbelievably painful to have somebody who you can rely on for physical support and survival, who you now want to rely on for emotional support because you're generally safe enough to be able to do so, and you just can't do it because that person is lying to you about the single most important event of your entire life. It's about as complex as it gets.
Think about what he did. How many people are dead because of him?
Last chance.
I'm not giving up, my friend.
I want to share a little bit of a read I have on this scene that I don't see talked about very often, and it might sound a little bit weird. I don't think her hitting Nora there has anything to do with Nora or Abby. I think she's hitting Joel. I think the reason she goes into that blind of a rage and because she goes that irrational is because Joel let her down by dying. Joel let her down to some extent by doing what he did. Joel has left her with the guilt of what it means to have seen so many die because of the decision he made. Joel is the reason she's sitting there even contemplating whacking this woman with a pipe and why she's killed as many people as she's killed on her way through Seattle. She's mad at Joel, man. And when Nora says to her, you know how many people could be alive if he'd have just done his job? I think there's a part of Ellie that agrees, as evidenced by the flashback we saw. Joel's dead. Ellie can't tank her anger out on him. But in that moment, that anger, that strong of an anger towards somebody she doesn't know, who is peripheral to the person who killed Joel, that's Joel. She's hitting Joel, saying, you son of a bitch, why'd you put me in this position? Why did you leave me and then put me in this position without taking accountability for her own actions? But again, that's my read on why that's so intense for her.
I made her talk.
People often think that they have limits that they will never cross, and Ellie's learning that that's not true. And she's learning that Joel's memory and what happened to him is the impetus for her breaking past whatever boundaries she would have ever thought she had. And that's enough to really cut deep. Joel's the only person, besides maybe Dina, that Ellie would go to the ends of the earth to make this decision about. And so I think there is a ridiculously huge form of dissonance happening for Ellie, which is why she's so shaken. Which is that on one hand, she's doing things she probably never imagined she would do, all in the name of Joel, and that's really stressing her out. She's having to look at herself differently, but simultaneously, she is having about as close to an experience of empathy to Joel's moment in the hospital as she's ever gonna have, which is I'm willing to throw away everything I believe and all the boundaries I ever thought I had for this one person. She's getting drawn closer to him from an empathy standpoint, which is sure to feel good in some way because it shows just how much he loved and adored her and was willing to go to the ends of the earth for her. But then, on top of all of it, it brings her closer to just how horrible of a person Joel was in doing that. And now she has to ask herself, am I that horrible? Is the person that I feel this sense of closeness to as this horrible? Reconciling that in this world with no attachment figure outside of Dina, who's already got a chaotic relationship going on, is enough to send somebody into the ultimate dissociative spiral. And if the only thing that Ellie has to hold on to give her some sense of sanity and control amidst all of that cognitive chaos is find Abby, that tunnel vision makes complete sense from a psychological standpoint. So if you look at this as Ellie being overly brutal, it makes sense. As weird as that is to say, it is unbelievably complicated what Ellie's experiencing. By this time tomorrow, we will have altered the course of history. Jay. There's a good chance that Ellie's here, not out of curiosity, but out of a desire to confirm her prior suspicions. It's clearly been eating at her since this happened. And Joel obviously is not interested in breaking down his lie and deconstructing it and being honest with her, and so she's decided to take matter into her own hands, which is exactly what people Ellie's age do. Kids get smart when they get into their teens. They know what's going on. They can usually tell when their parents are lying to them, and if you're not starting to facilitate trust with your kids by being truthful to them, they will go out and seek the truth on their own. And this is an example of this. This is now going to confirm probably her suspicions about what's been going on. And what this also has the potential to do is shatter her image of Joel, which goes to show you just how important this is to her to understand that she's willing to let this information potentially destroy what she knows of Joel.
Making a vaccine. Would have killed you. So I stopped them.
Oh my God. Don't you fucking touch me! I'll go back. But we're done.
Ellie has been experiencing a significant amount of guilt and probably sadness for the fact that she wasn't the cure. She had to completely break down her purpose because the person that never left her and cared for her and the only other person that was ever reliable for her has been perpetuating a lie that she was not the cure. That interaction makes complete sense. from a psychological standpoint. Ellie's devastated because she has to come to terms with the fact that the person that's been reliable to her has been lying to her this entire time and stripped away her identity, and now she's left to pick up the pieces of that and look at all the fallout from that, and that doesn't feel fair to her because now she has to associate all of that with the decision that Joel made. I think she also knows that she's still emotionally connected with Joel, so anytime that she finds it in her to connect with Joel emotionally or to move towards Joel, it brings her closer to all of this, which is going to be really hard, which brings her closer to dissonance. So her teenage brain has to go into, get the fuck away from me. And she's pushing for distance. Going back to Jackson, but we're done. And that is so devastating for Joel because he made a decision that was in his own self-interest. And now it's become clear that it was in his self-interest and not in the interest necessarily of her and humanity. And that's in part because of the fact that he's been lying to her. The lie perpetuates the selfishness of it.
We can get to the marina through here.
No, we're taking the boat.
You heard them, right? They're talking about Tommy.
We don't know that.
Who else is it gonna be?
If it is him, he'll be gone by the time we get there. Abby is where he'll be headed, so if we just
What if he's in trouble?
He can take care of himself.
Jesus Christ.
The best way to help Tommy is to go after Abby. You do this, I'm not saving your ass again.
I really hope you make it.
She just betrayed the shit out of Jesse. Now, I mean, again, this is where she's in a bind. If she says to him, no, fuck you, I'm killing Abby before we leave, Jesse's probably going to say, then I'm staying with Dina, I'm getting her back to Jackson, good luck. Ellie is so dead set on avenging Joel's death that she's willing to take everybody else with her, including Jesse. She's willing to blow up her relationships. She's just like Joel, and I think the more she does this, the more she connects with Joel. She sees this as the ultimate form of love, because that's what Joel gave her. Joel blew apart everything in order to save her and to maintain a connection with her, and that's what she's doing now, probably out of a sense of indebtedness to him, that she owes this to him. There's a whole theory of family therapy that's all about that, called contextual therapy. It's all about ledgers, but she's self-destructive to some extent and blowing everything up because she wants to show this one person. And I really think it comes down to the thank you that she was never able to give him.
Whoa. Hey.
It's all right. Come on, let's go. Let's go. It's all right.
That sounded to me like Joel's voice. That very first Ellie. I know it was Tommy, and I know him and Tommy are brothers. They have somewhat similar voices, but it definitely sounded like Joel, which I don't think is an accident. Ellie being in that traumatic of a space where everything is becoming tunnel vision, she's sort of dissociating, which we've talked about before. And the thing that grounds her and brings her back into that moment is somebody saying her name, somebody who sounds like Joel, that she hears as Joel, because all she's thinking about in that moment to draw energy from is Joel. That's all she is thinking about. You and I would hear that too. You sort of hear that internal object come out in that moment as a stabilizing force because that's what her tunnel vision is. So she's simultaneously dissociating from that moment where like everything's kind of clouding in and she's freaking out. And then Joel's voice pierces through that as kind of the clarity. And Joel has been the stabilizing force for her through this entire chaos. Even in death, that's what Joel is. And so we hear Tommy's voice, but we hear it as Joel because that's where she's at. And then she sees that it's Joel and it kind of jars her and it restabilizes her and she's kind of back in the moment, but she's jarred by all this. And again, I think it's because she's making a bunch of decisions that she doesn't want to make, but she feels like she owes it to Joel to do this. Is it worth it? And I think Ellie's kind of asking herself that. I think everybody's asking themselves that. Like, at what point is this not worth it anymore? This is only worth it if Joel is who Ellie has idealized him to be. This is not worth it if Joel is who Joel actually is. And there's tension in that for Ellie. Ellie is constantly having to hold on to this idealized Joel or else this is worthless. And only she has that, I think, at this point. I think Tommy has it to some extent. Jesse certainly doesn't have it. Dina doesn't have it. It's hard. It gets hard to get on board with this, other than we feel a sense of connection and obligation to Joel as well. There's a lot of conflicting experiences we're having here.
The more the merrier. Hey, look, Joel. It's your favorite.
And so here we are, right? We've seen a couple times where Ellie has talked to Joel, like even this, right? She sees that poster and she says, here you go, Joel, your favorite, which tells me that over the course of these 2 years, Ellie has found it within herself to empathize with why Joel did what he did. That she got there. She's gonna say, you know what? He did it because I told him in that house back in Jackson that everybody had left me except for him. And in that moment, he made it his business not to leave me. And he did it even with that cost. And I think Ellie can come to appreciate that. To say, you know what? I get it, man. At the end of the day, I appreciate it. And then that makes me think that maybe the most devastating part of this entire thing is that she doesn't get to take care of Joel by saying to him, thank you. I'm alive because of you. She never got to say that to him. He died thinking that he let her down. He died thinking that she was going to hate him for the rest of her life because they never reconciled this. And she doesn't get the opportunity to take care of him by saying thank you. And Ellie's as much of a caretaker as Joel is. That, to me, is maybe the most tragic part of this whole thing.
Abby.
No!
Abby, don't look.
Dad! Dad! No! No!
Abby experiencing that moment as a trauma is just as legitimate as Ellie experiencing that moment as a trauma. And I'm not saying this to justify the actions of Ellie or Abby. I'm saying that the experience of that moment, we hear the same ringing, we see the same type of dissociation happen for the two of them in these moments. There's a parallel process there. That trauma is real. We're not going to compare which one's better, Joel shooting versus Abby hitting with a golf club. At the end of the day, both of these women saw their primary attachment caregiver dead at the hands of somebody else who had their own personal agenda that didn't align with their own. And we're seeing the conflict of how what makes sense to some may not make sense to others. And that creates dissonance in our brain. And when we experience dissonance, we experience what's called aversive arousal. Aversive arousal is experienced as anxiety. And then our brain goes into a whole process of what's called inconsistency compensation to try to help mitigate that dissonance as best we can. And what I love about this is that we are riding right along with the dissonance with everybody here. There are arguments to be made in all sorts of directions, and then there's also time being of the essence, which makes it really just difficult for us to navigate. And then we have to weigh our emotional investment in what's happening. We are way more emotionally invested in Joel and Ellie than we are in Jerry and Abby. But had The Last of Us 1 been about Jerry and Abby, we would be more emotionally invested in their story than we are Joel and Ellie. And so it speaks to that, right? Like, we get pulled in the direction of what is represented to us. And so if that's the case, if we were to have played The Last of Us 1 with Abby and Jerry, Joel looks like the biggest fucking asshole you've ever seen in your entire life. That man is a villain and a half in that story. And we look at him as a hero because we had emotional investment in his character development. And then that gets into, does our emotional investment in people help contribute to the explanations that we create to try to justify their actions, even if there is some level of objectivity that what that person did was wrong or right? This is literally human nature handed to us on a platter by this game.
I just don't understand how anybody willingly joins the Scars.
Why not?
Because they're an insane cult. That's why.
Well, in the QZs, people would refer to the Fireflies as terrorists. Fanatics.
We were naive. We weren't fanatical.
We blew up checkpoints and assassinated soldiers.
It's not the same.
I'm just saying...
Don't say shit like that at the stadium, okay?
Okay, all right.
This is what happens when you're pulled into strongly ideological groups. You learn in that group that the way you're doing it is different than if others do the same thing. And by virtue of isolation and having your needs met by that group, you are groomed to take on that mentality. so that if somebody presents information like Owen does here, you fight for the group. You use the narratives that the group has propagandized into your mind to make it okay that you have done a thing, because it's unbearable to think of yourself as being in a group that would do things that you consider to be atrocities outside of the group. So this is the power of being in a cult or being in a strongly ideological group, where Abby is protecting the group that she's in, understandably so. But when Owen presents information that we might say is objectively closer to the truth, Abby fights against it, because that counters every single narrative she's ever heard about the Fireflies or the WLF. And we're seeing Abby do what's called assimilation as a form of inconsistency compensation, where she is basically trying to take what he's saying, her experience of a person she cares about, offering counter information to a group that she grew up in, ideologically believes in, and she's taking those previous expectations of that group and her cognitive schema of that, and she's trying to jam what Owen is saying into that pre-existing box by saying, we're different. But you notice as he pokes, she gets to a point where she can't really articulate the difference and then basically just says stop. It's because these are not original thoughts of her own. These are thoughts that have been shoved into her. And if you don't understand the reasoning for the thoughts that are shoved into your mind, you eventually hit a block where you just go, I don't know. Because they're not well thought out original ideas about things. They're not critical ideas. It's okay to be part of a group and still be critical of that group.
Did you hear what they called me? Yeah. Do you want to ask me about it? Do you want me to ask you about it?
No.
Okay.
Lev is chosen name, and I'm guessing that they were dead naming him. If you don't know what the term dead naming is, if Lev's sex assigned at birth was female and was named with a female name at the time of birth, as soon as Lev realizes and says, you know what, no, I'm a dude, and says, so I want you to call me Lev because that is a name that fits more who I am. At that point, to call Lev by his given name at birth that doesn't align with his gender identity is called dead naming, which is a really shitty thing to do. Really shitty thing to do. And if you do that, you're a dick, particularly if you do it maliciously or intentionally. Now, it's one thing for Lev's parents, maybe in this case, to like have an adjustment period from going from the dead name to Lev. And we might understand that because for up until that point, they've only known him by his dead name. But once you get that ingrained, you damn well better make the effort to refer to him as Lev. That's the importance of a name, right? Us calling Lev Lev is deeply important because it's noticing and acknowledging Lev for who he is. And that is what he has told us. We don't get to dictate Lev's identity. He does. We will be referring to Lev as male. Unless Lev tells me that he prefers to be identified as trans, we refer to him as male because that is Lev's gender.
My arm. I know. Focus on your breathing. In and out. Nice and steady. In and out.
Super smart. Abby's Crisis Intervention 101 passes the Dr. Mick test. She does two things that are very important. First thing is she is a directive. She doesn't ask questions. She doesn't put any cognitive stress on the woman that she's carrying. Instead, she tells her what to do. She says, focus on your breathing, which is very important because she's starting to panic. She's probably coming out of shock and feeling the pain, and that's going to lead to a panic attack when she realizes what's going on here on top of all the context. Second thing she does is she focuses on in, hold, out through the mouth. That's very important as well because we need to engage her parasympathetic nervous system as fast as we possibly can. And the fact that Abby does it with her is even more important because not only does it help her focus on her breathing, it also gives her something external to pay attention to so that she does not get swept away by the panic. That is absolutely perfect what Abby did right there to try to mitigate it, because a panicking human in this moment is only going to make things worse. And you have to be very careful because it can be dangerous if she starts to panic. So Abby having the presence of mind to guide her through that, be with her, breathe with her while she carries her through is absolutely fabulous. Absolutely fabulous.
When he explained to me
felt inside. I told him he had to keep it to himself. I was hoping he'd snap out of it. He seemed fine for a while. But then he shaved his head. Like one of the men. It was suicide.
Is that when you ran?
First, I screamed at him. I hit him. I was so stupid.
I do think that it is important to talk about Yara's response to that, because that's a very common response. It's a response that comes out of a understanding of the context through which Lev is coming out, so to speak, which is that it's dangerous. They live in a context by being Seraphite where she's literally, Yara just said, that her mother would strangle her own child because the ideology is more important than the deviation from it. So Yara was trying to protect Lev. Now Lev, being the age that he is, doesn't developmentally necessarily in that moment, whenever that was, have an understanding of all of those dynamics that Yara does. So Lev is very likely to personalize that experience and to think that maybe he did something wrong, that he is not being accepted, that people don't get it. And some of those things may be true, but that's why it's all the more important for Yara and the other adults involved to understand that their reactions to these things only make sense to Lev if given the context through which those reactions exist. So Yara would have done well to say to Lev, I want you to be you. I see you for who you are. I also want to keep you safe. How can I help keep you safe? Because we do not live in an environment that is going to allow this to happen. Are you prepared to take that risk? And if you are, I'm willing to go with you. I'm willing to look out for you and uphold that. We need to be aware of what we're going into here.
Lev, we need to move. She's gone. Oh my God, she's gone. Lev, come on. Those were your fucking people. You're my people. Listen to me. We're gonna have to fight to get out of this, okay? And then I need you to show us to those boats. We don't let anybody stop us. Yeah? Okay. Follow me.
Now, for Abby to look at him in that moment and say, you are my people. Hopefully when all this is over, she's got to realize that as soon as she did that, she has now taken on the role of caregiver for Lev. That is what she has done. She is now the only person who can reliably be here, or who has reliably been here through all the trauma that Lev has experienced. They have shared it. So they are bound, man. Now, I understand that we're trying to survive here, so we're going to do whatever it takes to survive. But if we survive this, that emotional bond, holy crap, man. Lev might as well be Abby's son at this point, because Abby basically just looked at him and said, I take you for who you are. I'm willing to leave this entire group of folks and be here for you because you matter to me. And this is huge for Abby's sense of self. Again, I think Abby needs to find a caretaking role because she sees this as redemption for the stuff that she has done. She owes it to herself to do this. And she is. And she's in. She's all in. She's committed.
Oh, thank God. Did she do this? I just tried talking to her. I tried to make her understand. But she just kept yelling. She started chasing me. I tried to make her stop. I was just pushing her off of me. She hit the table. Listen, Yara. You were defending yourself. You did nothing wrong. It's gonna be okay, I promise.
As if he still holds an idealized version of his mom that's capable of accepting him for who he is, he's going to see himself as the bad guy. He's going to split that. as a kid his age would do if they were in this position. Again, he did a very adult thing, but he's a child. He's got a child's brain. You can't force a prefrontal cortex to develop faster than it does. He has to deconstruct the idealized version of his mother in order to make peace with the fact that he killed her. That's his objective going forward. For as long as he sees his mother for something he wishes she was instead of what she is, he's the bad guy, and that's not fair to him. And now imagine being Abby. Somebody who you've started to grow close to and take care of has now just witnessed their mother dead by the hands of somebody else if you're Yara, or by your own hands if you're Lev, which is absolutely going to bring back some memory of seeing her father dead by the hands of somebody else, but is also simultaneously going to give her probably a profound sense of empathy for what it is that the two of them are experiencing right now. This moment is a huge connective piece for the three of them. They have all now have the shared experience of seeing their dead parent lying on the floor. Now, do they have the same kind of relationship with their mother that Abby had with her father? No, but it doesn't change that the process itself is still very similar. And so this is a point of connection here. And I appreciate that Abby lets Yara take care of Lev. I think that's a very important thing for her to do there, instead of overstepping her bounds and trying to be that stabilizing force. Like, it's a good example of detriangulating at a really important time.
Abby!
Don't ever let me see you again. Come on.
Who have I been? Who am I now? Who do I want to be? Is a question that Abby has been asking herself, I think, for the duration that we've known her. Abby did what she set out to do when she killed Joel, and I don't think that Abby's entirely okay with the fact that she did that. And like I said, I think it pushed her past her limits. I think it was something that she realized, that's not who I want to be. I don't want to be a person that does that. She could have killed Ellie there. Absolutely. No problem. And she looks at Lev, somebody she can take care of, somebody that represents who she wants to be. And she says, is that the person that kills Ellie here? No. So she says, don't ever let me see you again, and walks away. And honestly, I commend her for that, because I think Abby already knows when she killed Joel, it didn't make it better. So killing Ellie's not going to make it better. Killing anybody's not going to make it better. The only thing that has made it better for her is to take care of Lev. So let's get Lev and let's go. And I really think that that's what happens there for her.
Okay?
That's exactly what a PTSD type flashback can look like. Now, I don't know that Ellie actually is diagnosable with PTSD, and I'm going to caution anybody watching this to suggest that she is diagnosable with that. I think it's way too easy to throw that term around. I haven't been able to do an assessment, so for me to say she has PTSD because she had a flashback is not good. However, I'm going to put some context on this. When people experience a trauma, Joel's death absolutely being one, brain scans the environment, looks for all the contextual clues to ensure that that doesn't happen ever again. And sometimes down the line, you can have something inadvertently, a nice little concoction of environmental factors that register just well enough on your subconscious vigilant brain that it kicks you into a flashback. And there's a couple aspects of that flashback that are particularly interesting to me, which is that as Ellie's running down the stairs, Joel yells her name. That's not what happened when we saw it, but Joel is specifically calling out for her, which tells me that Ellie has absolutely personalized that Joel needed her in that moment, that she was the only one that could save him, and he knew it. Thus, he would call out for her, which means she has taken on some burden of the responsibility of what happened to Joel. The trauma there, by the way, is Ellie's sense of helplessness in that moment. It's not even necessarily Joel's death. It's the fact that she couldn't do anything about it. Remember, trauma is a gross violation of expectation coupled with a lost sense of safety and security. Well, the security that was threatened there was Ellie's attachment figure taken away. But up until that point, every single piece of adversity that Ellie and Joel had experienced together, they got through. They were able to help themselves. And in that specific moment, Ellie was not able to help him. That is the first time she was not able to help him. That's the violation of expectation, not Joel's death. At any point in time, anybody in this world can die. But Ellie has been able to get through all of this with Joel. And so we see the trauma for her in this flashback be, I can't access him. I can't help him. I'm not available to him.
He told me about a woman that he traded with while he was moving through California. Described her as built like an ox, traveling with a kid with scars across his face. He said they're living along this coast in a beach sailboat right here. That's gotta be her.
We're done with that, so.
I'm sorry.
Well, I can't go.
I know.
Reckon it's easy. Forget about her. You sitting all comfy way out here?
Hey.
I'll make her pay.
Tommy.
That's what you said when we got back to Jackson.
Tommy.
What a joke.
You remember way back in The Last of Us 1 when Joel shows up in Jackson, he says to Tommy, I want you to take Ellie. I want you to take her to the Fireflies because they're your people. Tommy says no. And Joel says, you owe me that. You remember that? Tommy says,
But I ain't taking that girl off your hands.
You survived because of me.
It wasn't worth it.
Then he has a little bit of a change of heart and he says he'll do it, but then ultimately Joel decides to do it himself. I think that moment is relatively critical here because this isn't about Ellie and Tommy. This is about Tommy and Joel. I think Joel died before Tommy also, like Ellie, had the opportunity to say to him, thank you. Joel's awfulness was a necessary sacrifice in many situations in order for Tommy and Ellie to be alive for us to see them now. And because both of them probably in their own ways conceptualized Joel as being immortal, they never took the time to say to him, thanks, man, which is something that many of us come to a realization that we didn't do when folks that matter to us died. So I think instead of having an interaction with Joel in a very abstract psychological way with the object that he has with him, Tommy has instead directed that energy into, you know what? I owe it to Joel to get this done. Because again, this is the world we live in. If there's anybody that understands what I'm about to ask to do, it's Ellie, because nobody else in this world can empathize with what I've been through like Ellie can. And he comes and makes an impossible ask out of her. Probably told himself before he went in to do that, this is me taking care of Ellie because Ellie must care for this too. And so he sees the relationship that Ellie has with Dina. He sees that she has this house, that she's built something for herself, that she has this kid to take care of. And he's jealous because he ain't got that. And so to see Ellie have that is a further reinforcement that he doesn't have it, which is going to make him all the more angry. And it's going to remind him that he doesn't have Joel either. And so he's going to want somebody to pay for that instead of taking his own accountability in. The shitty thing about this is Tommy knows deep down in Ellie's soul, this is going to appeal to her. And I think he's right because Ellie didn't get pissed. And I think Dina knows that Tommy just fucked with their relationship in the biggest way he ever could have done. Ellie was probably making her peace with the fact that she had no idea where Abby went. She has no idea that she's alive. Ellie probably could conceptualize Abby as being dead. And now Tommy comes in, somebody she trusts. He says she's alive and she's right here. It draws upon whatever sense of indebtedness that Ellie has to Tommy. It relives whatever indebtedness she has to Joel. She continues to have these flashbacks about Joel and being helpless. She now has an opportunity, and Tommy has just completely wedged Dina and Ellie's relationship. Whatever work Dina and Ellie have been doing to try to get this out of their lives has just been completely exposed as not having been managed effectively. I understand Dina's anger. I wouldn't fault her for going out there, but I think the better route would have been if Dina had come toward Ellie and said, you know what? Fuck Tommy. What he just did was totally a scramble. I'm right here. I can only imagine what that must have been like for you. Because that would show Ellie that this is the person that's reliable for me when I'm distressed, and this is the person I want to be around. This is the person that reminds me of Joel. The good part of Joel. The part of Joel that wants to teach her how to play guitar, not kill people for her.
I have to finish it.
You don't owe Tommy anything.
I don't sleep. I don't eat. I'm not like you, Dina.
What? You think this is easy? For you and for him, I deal with it.
I love you.
Prove it. Stay.
I can't.
Getting close to other people and allowing them in means that she's moving away from holding on to Joel. And for a person who doesn't openly process their grief and be real with it to themselves of the way that it's affecting them, this is the decision they'd make. She is falsely equating her connection with Dina to being at the expense of her connection to Joel. We know it's not. Ellie's not talking about it. She's not processing it. She's not allowing space for Joel in her relationship. Talking about Joel is something that Dina is open to. She's okay for about it. So when she's under duress, like she is right now, people seek proximity to their attachment figures. And so she is holding on to the internal object of Joel. Dina hasn't overridden it. Dina was never going to override it unless Ellie allowed her to, and Ellie didn't allow her to. So she is seeking proximity to the person who is responsible for Joel's last breath. The closest she can get to Joel is to find Abby, not to be with Dina. Dina wasn't there. This isn't about letting go of Joel. This is about allowing Joel to occupy space in her mind and her life in a different way. And she's not doing it. So off she goes to say thank you to Joel for the fact that she has everything that she just destroyed.
Go. Just take him.
Who have I been? Who am I now? Who do I want to be? The way she sees Joel as she puts her stuff in the boat is the way that she was forced to see Joel by Abby. And that's an image of him that for as long as she carries that image, she is willing to do things that are so beyond what she ever imagined she would do. She acted on it. She is then at the moment that she has been waiting for a really long time. And then she sees an image of Joel that is her. The Joel that plays guitar, that taught her to play guitar. The Joel that looks at her in a way that nobody has ever looked at her. A man that went to the ends of the earth for her. to take care of her, who valued that more than humanity itself. And I think seeing Joel in that moment is just enough for Ellie to realize that if Joel saw what she's doing right now, he might understand it, but maybe that's not who she wants to be for that guy. So she pulls off and realizes that she's the one who gets to decide how Joel lives on for her, not Abby. She's the one who gets to decide which image of Joel do I want to carry in my heart going forward, and what does that mean for how I choose to act. This is the time of the most stress that Ellie has probably experienced outside of watching Joel die. And in that moment, she sees him. She sees her internalized object of him. She pulls closer to Joel. Remember, this isn't about us. This is about Ellie and Abby. It's not about us. This isn't about our story. This isn't about how we feel. This is about how they feel. This is about what's going on for them and how they navigated it. We have to take ourselves out of this moment and take it for what it is and understand that quite literally everything leading up until this point makes sense, whether we want it to or not, because it happened. The trauma for Ellie is not Joel's death. The trauma for Ellie is the loss of control in that moment. The reparative function for Ellie is to find control over the thing that is closest to that moment that took it away from her. So when she has her hand on Abby's neck, she is in control, not just in the general sense, but she is in control of whether Abby lives or dies. And no matter which one she chooses is going to bring her the satisfaction of the fact that she was the one that got to dictate it. Abby doesn't get to live here because she beat the shit out of Ellie and walked away. She gets to live here because Ellie let her live. And Ellie letting her live is the choice that Joel, as she wants to remember him, would prefer. It's the choice that she sees as self-redemptive here. That's the reparative experience, the opportunity to make the decision for Abby to die. We see the culmination of both redemptive story arcs in this moment in the water. We see it when Abby says, I don't want to fight you. That's Abby taking control. I'm not going to do it. I have decided that my life is dedicated to taking care of this boy, no matter the cost. And for Ellie, it's I get to decide that Abby lives. And to be completely honest with you, I don't know if there's much of a better way that it plays out, other than there's heaps of dead bodies along the way of folks that have just as complex stories. But if we're taking these two folks as the focus of our attention, Ellie's going to realize there were consequences to this, and so is Abby. And I think if we want either of those two dead in this moment, we're no better than either of them.
I have no idea what that girl's intentions are, but I do know that she would be lucky to have you.
You're such an asshole.
I'm not trying to.
I was supposed to die in that hospital. My life would have fucking mattered. But you took that from me.
If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. But I would like to try.
That conversation, I think, is incredibly important because it shows what was unresolved for Ellie when Joel died. She didn't get a chance to work herself up to forgive him. She blamed him for the lack of meaning that was left in her life and then attached all of the meaning in her life to him. So the dissonance in the way that Ellie acts relative to her set of values and to who she is makes complete sense because her entire conviction and sense of self is built around a dissonant idea. And her forgiveness of him was not something that was ever fully realized for him. And I think that was something that she probably experienced a significant amount of guilt around and disappointment around. This was her effort to forgive him because she couldn't do it the way that she would have if he was alive. Thank you to Naughty Dog for creating this, for developing these characters, for putting as much time and effort into literally every single aspect of this game that you put into it. And it's been an honor for me to play it. I know that you guys have caught a lot of heat for the game. I hope that my playthrough is one that maybe even some folks at Naughty Dog can look at and say, hey, this is really cool. You have provided a template through your game through which I can educate people about stuff in a really accessible way. And I am really grateful for that experience. You can tell that there was a lot of love and care put into this, no matter how much people love or hate it. I think even the hate goes to show just how invested people are in the world that you've created. From me to you, thank you, and keep doing your thing.